Well, g'day everybody. Welcome to Young Adults Live. It is great to be back with you here again on another Sunday afternoon. I hope you have had a good weekend and have enjoyed a bit of sunshine over the last week. We are really excited to join with you today. Here at Young Adults Live, we are passionate about having interesting conversations that empower your following of Jesus and give you confidence to walk with him in each and every day of your life. And this is an interactive conversation. And so I just want to encourage you to jump on the chat feed and to say hi to us, engage with us. We'd love to hear questions from you as we go along today and to just interact with you in the conversation, all that we do today. So jump on board now and say hi. We'd love to say hi back to you. I want to introduce to you our guest today as we jump in, a good friend of mine, Nick Rodwell, who is joining with us to be a part of the conversation. Nick, welcome along to Young Adults Live today. It's great to have you here with us. Give us a quick intro. Give us your 30-second wrap of who you are, what you do. Some of us might know you, some of us might not. So, mate, welcome along.
Thank you. Good to be here. Yeah, my name's Nick. I'm married to Vanita. We're both from Melbourne. We've got a 5-month-old daughter, Amelia. We've spent the last few years living in South Africa, working for a mission organisation, OM, and running a discipleship training program for OM in Africa called the Africa Trek. We came back about 6 months ago. We were just going to come back and have our daughter and then head back to South Africa for the rest of this year. And then COVID happened and interrupted our plans. And so we've moved back to Melbourne a little earlier than we had planned. I'm a carpenter, so I've gone back to work for a local builder. And we're in the process of settling back into life in Melbourne. So that's us in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, Nick, we're so thankful for you to give us some time and to share some of your wisdom. And we're going to talk a little bit today about decision-making and the question, God, what do I do next? And Nick's going to give us some great wisdom in that. Also today, as a part of the conversation, is Jazz Coughlin, who's co-hosting. You might know Jazz, one of our young adults. She heads up our senior kids ministry, does an amazing job there, part of our media team. And Jazz is co-hosting today and monitoring our chat feeds. And so you can jump on board and say hi to Jazz and interact with her at any point through the conversation today and feed your questions in. And Jazz is going to throw them into the conversation. And Jazz, you're going to kick us off with a devotion today. So over to you to get us started.
Thank you so much. Well, welcome everyone. I'm super keen that you've all been able to make it this afternoon. I just wanted to share a little something that's been on my heart specifically this week. So when the announcement of lockdown being extended, I was so incredibly upset. All of a sudden, this had hit, and then all of these things going on in my life. And I was getting to a point where I didn't even want to spend time with God. I was so incredibly upset and angry and just confused as to why all of this is going on in the world and in my life. I was super mad that God couldn't just click his fingers and then boom, everything would go back to normal. And personally, I hate when things are out of my control. So it has been so hard to just give it all to Jesus. I just wanted to feel free of all this frustration and anger that I was feeling. So literally, earlier this week, I was on my way home from work in the car, and I felt the need to play Worship in the Valley playlist. And I was just in the car jamming out to some worship music, and then boom, the Holy Spirit just hit me. And I was absolutely bawling my eyes out. Jesus certainly took the wheel of that car because I could not see much through my tears. But all these feelings that I had been suppressing, saying that everything was going to be okay and all this will blow over soon, that had just finally come out. And currently in this waiting, in this season, just coming back to Jesus is phenomenal. And just to go back to the basics, to reestablish your quiet time routine, to try out a new Bible study, to try out a new way of how you read the Bible and your intimate time with God, we can turn this frustration and anger into a time of ultimate joy. So, I just really wanted to encourage you that if you are feeling distant from God, if you are feeling all these emotions and feelings towards Him about it, talk to Him about it. Talk to the people around you about it. I promise you that you are not the only one going through this. We are all so incredibly loved by God, and He has the most amazing plan for us. So I want to challenge you this week that wherever you are in your relationship with God, that you go out and you spend quality time with Him. Stop scrolling, stop binging on Netflix, and just spend some time with Him, because you will not be disappointed. This is the season that your life and your relationship with God can truly change for the better. So that's my little devotional for you this week. Thank you, Lance.
Hey, Jazz, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that word with us from this week. And that's just so encouraging in this moment of life for us living in the city of Melbourne. If you want to jump on board the chat and just give Jazz some encouragement and a shout out to her, I just want to encourage you to do that. Great stuff, Jazz. And like I said earlier, throw your questions in and Jazz will be passing them on to a part of the conversation today. Real quick thing, just want to take a minute. If you are part of our ministry, and you might be aware that 4 weeks ago, just a personal thing from my family's life, my wife Laura tested positive to COVID, and I've tested positive as well over the past few weeks. Just want to talk about that really quickly. We're doing well. It's been a pretty tough 4 weeks for us, but I just want to thank so many of you just so much for your prayers and your encouragement, your messages. It's meant the world to us. And we've been doing it tough a little bit, but I've been overwhelmed by the support of our church and this ministry and so many of you. So thank you for your prayers. We are coming out the other side. We've still got a few symptoms, but hoping to be cleared for myself this week. And just a word of encouragement, Eden, our 2-year-old daughter, got a test again on the weekend and she came back negative again, which is a bit of a miracle, we sense, because she's been in a house now for 4 weeks with people that are positive to COVID and hasn't picked it up. And so we're very thankful for that. And thank you for your prayers and encouragement. Like I said, it has meant the world to us, the support that we've had from our church. So just wanted to let you know that as we get started today, just a personal story from our world at the moment. All right, let's jump in. The question we want to talk about today is, God, what do I do next? Hearing God's voice in our decision-making and making the right decisions. You know that each and every day you make something like 35,000 decisions. Some of them won't matter. They're pretty small. They might be, do I put white socks on or black socks today? And unless you're really into fashion, it probably doesn't matter too much. Some of them will matter. Some of them will influence how you experience that day, that week, that month. And some of them will set up the course that your life takes. Between the age of 18 and 30, so many of the decisions you make each and every day will matter. They will set up habits and routines in the path that your life takes. And many of us are faced with decisions right now in our life. You might be deciding what course of study to take, whether to change study, what job today to take, whether to change jobs. You might be wondering whether you should pursue this girl and ask her out on a date. You might be thinking, is this the guy that I'm going to marry? Big decisions to make in life. Where am I going to live? How should I spend my money? What should I give my money to? What church should I go to? What small group should I invest in? The decisions go on and on and on. There's so many decisions that we make in our lives and they matter. The question is, God, what do you say about this decision? What do you want me to do? How do we hear God's voice and know his will in these decisions? God, what do I do next? That's a conversation we're going to have today. And really privileged to have Nick a part of that. And Nick, just want to ask you, you mentioned that you've spent about half of the last 7 years of your life in Africa. Tell us a little bit more about that story and how it is that you've decided to spend that time in Africa over the last few years.
Yeah, sure. So like I mentioned, I am a carpenter. So out of high school, I did an apprenticeship. And then at the end of my apprenticeship, I wanted to go and do a mission trip. So I went down to the OM Australia office just near NewHope and told them what time frame I had available and how long I wanted to go for. And I just said, what options do you have that fit that time frame, fit that criteria? And they came back to me with 3 options. 3 pamphlets, and I looked over them and felt nothing really. So I prayed, asked God to direct my decision making, and I picked one of them. It ended up being a program called the Africa Trek. So I went in January 2013, for about 6 months, and had an incredible experience with my own faith with God, and saw him do some amazing things in me and other people around me on that team. And through that trip, it opened up other opportunities. I met other people, and my wife and I, we weren't married at the time, but we then started going together over to South Africa and spent time there. And then in 2017, we moved to South Africa to take over that ministry that I first did back in 2013. So we were back and forwards a few times, and then in 2017, we moved there together to run that ministry full time, and which is what we've been doing up until earlier this year.
So tell us some more about that, Nick. We're talking about big life-changing decisions, moving continents. The reality is most of us won't do that, but that is something God's led you to.
Yeah.
Tell us about those different decisions that you've made along the way. You know, first of all, going and getting a pamphlet and deciding, I'll head to Africa, to I'm actually going to move with my new wife or soon-to-be wife, and we're going to set up life in this new continent, leading a ministry. How did you go about those decision-making processes and discerning what God was saying to you in those moments?
Yeah, so I went about those two decisions. So from the time that I went in 2013 to when we moved together in 2017, my decision-making and the way that I heard God's voice was completely different. In 2013, I probably would have said that I didn't know how to hear God's voice, didn't know how to discern what he was saying very much at all. I guess I had a desire to do a mission trip. That's all that I knew, really. I knew the OM office because my parents had worked there, and so I went down there, and it just sounded like a very logical progression of how I ended up in Africa at that time. When we moved together, we made the decision at the end of 2016, and that time we had, hopefully matured a little bit in our faith and had a few more experiences of discerning God's voice. And so we got offered a job opportunity at that point to run that ministry. And so we then had to, put this into practice to say, all right, Lord, what are you saying about this specific situation? And in that specific situation, we got offered this job, and it hasn't happened like this for us every time. But basically, as soon as we got offered that job, we both walked away, looked at each other, and just said, we both feel like we're meant to say yes. It was a very deep sense inside both of us that God was telling us to take that job. We were in South Africa at the time when that job was offered to us. So when we came home, we spent time talking to our parents, talking to NewHope, talking to OM Australia and a few other people to get confirmation from them, to ask them, can you go and pray about this for a few days and see if you get an impression from God that's different to what we've got. So for us, that time in 2016, 2017, it was a very deep impression inside of us that God was saying, yes, I want you to move. There was no blinding light like Paul on the road to Damascus. There was no dream where something was revealed to us. There was no booming voice. And that's been our story for most of the time. The last 4 or 5 years is learning to discern that those inner thoughts, those inner feelings that you get when you're faced with a decision. I don't know if we've ever actually had a time when we've heard an audible voice or anything like that, but we've had plenty of situations where we've been confronted with 2, 3, 4 different options, and we have felt very much out of our depth and having to say, all right, Lord, we don't know what to do here, so we're just trusting that you'll guide us. And so that has been part of our journey of just discerning, how do you know when it's him speaking to you, how to know when it's him leading you in a direction. So that was how we made that decision in 2017 to move.
Yeah. So here there's some growth in your life and Vanita's, from you in 2013, this is a good idea, let's just do it, to, I can clearly sense God is leading us in 2017, but it wasn't the end of the story. You sense of where God was leading you, there's a whole lot of other things that you did. I want to come back to that and talk to that some more. But Jazz, I want to throw to you, you've got a question from home.
Yes, I've got a question from Tom. Tom asks, did you do anything on top of your OM position for work?
When back then, or did I do anything on top of that while I was in South Africa?
Let's make it that's the question, yeah.
Yeah.
And Tom, you can clarify for us if you want to say.
No, in South Africa, we were with OM full-time, the whole time we were there.
Yep. And Nick, just give us a little about Africa Trek. quickly describe to us what that is about as well, to paint a picture for us.
Yep. So in short, it's a discipleship program. One way to look at it is that it's like a extended church camp, extended youth camp, something like that. So we would get a team of people would sign up to come and do this program. They're usually Westerners, 18 to 30-year-olds. They would fly in from wherever they're from, Europe, North America. A couple of Australians would come. Our teams are usually about 10 people or so. They'd fly into South Africa, usually for 3 months. We would do a week or 2 weeks of some basic Bible teaching and training, going through the foundations of Christian faith, mission, evangelism, things like that. And then we'd spend a couple months going on outreaches around Southern Africa. So we would go and spend 1 or 2 weeks in several different communities working with local churches and OM missionaries that were working long-term in those areas. So we'd go in for a week or two and support those local ministries. We'd all debrief for a few days at the end, and everyone flies home again.
Yep. People from all around the world joining with you for 3 or 6 months and getting to know them really well. I want to pick up something that you said just before, that 2017, when you made that decision to move with Venita to Africa, you had a clear sense that it was God's voice and God was leading you to make this decision, but you didn't say yes straight away. You went through a period of asking a whole lot of other people and continuing to pray. Just tell us more about why you did that. Most of us would say, well, if I could just hear God's voice, that'd be the jackpot, and I just do whatever he says. Why hesitate, or why take a bit longer?
Yeah, I guess for us it just depends on the gravity of the decision you're making. Like you mentioned before, if you want to put on white or black socks in the morning, I don't really spend any time praying about that. I just pick a pair. If I've got a medium level decision to make, then I'd probably just chat to Venita about it, and then we just make a call. But if we're going to move continents, then I'm aware that even though I feel I can hear God well in some situations, and that time especially we both felt like we heard him, we thought there's still a possibility that you get it wrong. So let's just go and check with some other people, our parents, some other older Christians that have been doing this a lot longer than us, just for confirmation. It was a big thing. Even once we'd said yes, there was still probably 6 months, I think, from when we said yes to taking the job to when we moved. And so in that time of packing up our stuff and finishing it with work, selling some stuff, preparing to move, there's a lot of time where you might second guess yourself, you might doubt creeps in, you might wonder whether you actually did hear from God. So we probably had half a dozen people that we'd spoken to, and they'd all come back sort of affirming what we had already felt God say. It was just a good confirmation process for us to also hold on to for those times when doubt or second guessing did creep in.
So tell us some more about doubt. We probably would all experience it in trying to discern God's voice, and in those times when it's creeping in, is it the discernment of others that you lean on? What was it that led you through, or allows you to continue to make decisions even while doubt might exist in your life?
Yeah, I reckon that first time not that first time, but when we moved in 2017, the biggest doubt crept in once we were on the plane about to take off. And I still remember very clearly sitting there. We'd shipped everything off we shipped a bunch of our stuff over to South Africa, and, we'd left our jobs and everything, and we were sitting on the plane. And before we took off, and it's like whenever you travel somewhere, there's always that busy, frantic period before you get on the plane. Once you get on the plane, everything stops and calms down, and you finally take a breath. And I remember doing that on this flight. And before we took off, taking a big breath and just going, "Oh, Lord, I hope you're real." And it was probably the biggest time that I've not questioned my faith, but where I've really felt I am putting my life in God's hands in a way, not physically like I was about to die, but I am changing my entire life because I believe in Jesus. And so that was a big picture, almost how much do I believe that Jesus is who the Bible says he is. But in that moment, that first time, it was probably, well, I've made the call. I'm pretty sure I felt that it was right, and we've had these other people confirm that along the way, so I've just got to hold on to it for now and see how it plays out. And then over the last few years, as we've had other situations come up where we've had to hear from him, I guess I feel like I've learned to discern that voice a little clearer. And so it's almost like just getting better with practice, that you go, okay, I've been through this maybe half a dozen times now, not necessarily moving continents, but trying to trust in him for a decision on something. and I'm starting to figure out what it feels like when he's spoken to me. So that first time, it was largely we just dove into this, and we're just hoping and trusting that it all works out. And I think that it will, based on how we've prayed and how we felt and other people's confirmation. But there was still an element of doubt, and it wasn't till we'd sort of got to South Africa and started doing that work that I could look back and go, yeah, no, we definitely heard God right with this. But then over time, it's just been recognising his voice more clearly in those decisions before you get the chance to look back in hindsight.
Yep. I really relate to that thought that you had on the plane. God, gosh, I hope this is you. Decisions in life, just trusting and thinking, all right, God, we're all in now, so I hope you've got our back. Jazz, I want to throw to you for a question.
Yeah, so Nick, back in your time when you were still an apprentice, did you feel called to do more than just work once you were qualified?
Yeah, asking for a mate.
Yeah.
I didn't have a very clear calling or sense of anything at the time. There were a few ideas going through my head, but there wasn't a really firm desire or conviction at the time. I considered going to Bible college. I'd considered working at a church. And I think what I'd landed on myself when I finished my apprenticeship was I'll go to Africa for 6 months. I'll come back, become a builder, and start a building company. So that's sort of roughly where I'd landed in my head. But that was, that probably wasn't through much prayer or discerning. That was just, I probably had 3 or 4 different ideas going through my head, but I didn't have a very clear conviction or leading one way or another back then.
And so, Nick, it's really interesting. You talked about, I had 3 or 4 different directions my life could take. A lot of us would have 3 or 4 different options we could make in a particular decision right now. What's the difference for you between making these massive life-changing decisions and smaller other decisions in your life, and any examples of ways that you've processed decisions that maybe aren't as big as moving continents and changing your whole life?
Yeah, I'd say that for Venita and I, the process we go through, if we're faced with, in a particular situation, if there's 2 or 3 options and we've got to choose one, and it's bigger than just what socks you're going to wear that morning, and we're going to actually spend time trying to discern what God's saying, the process that we would go through, whether probably doesn't change depending on whether it's a big life-changing one or a moderate one or a smaller one. It's probably the same process, but we would spend a bit more time, I think, seeking, searching, and waiting on him if it's a bigger decision. So we felt like it was a yes to go and run the Africa trek, and I don't think we told OM yes for about a month after that. So we felt it was a yes. We took a week without talking to anybody, just for Venita and I to hash it out with each other, then a few weeks of talking to other people, and then finally came back to OM saying yes. Whereas in smaller decisions, we wouldn't take a month. Depending on what the decision is and what the time frame is, we might take 5 minutes. We might take a week. But the process would be the same. Did you ask then if I should go through the process now?
Yeah, well, I was going to ask that now. Let's get super practical. You're talking about a process.
Sure.
What process do you go through?
Yeah, no worries. So just like a few practical steps, which on the one hand, I don't like making a formula out of it because it's not, you can't make a formula out of it. So I guess, and I'll probably come back to this later, the overarching thing for Venita and I is that discerning God's voice is more about relationship with Jesus than anything else. And sometimes we can almost treat God like a magic 8-ball. You've got a decision to make. So then you get God out of the closet and you shake him, you do whatever you need to do, you go through your formula, hoping that he'll spit out an answer that's easy to understand and follow. And we've tried hard to get away from that way of viewing him and seeing it more as a relationship. And a quote that I always come back to, which is more to do with prayer, but it ties in with this, is I don't know who the quote's from, but it's just a question saying, is prayer your steering wheel or your spare tire? So is prayer what you go to when you're stuck and broken down, or is prayer what guides your life? And that is something that we have tried to live out more in going, we don't want to just go to God when we need something, but we want it to be about relationship, daily, having an intimate relationship with Jesus. So that's the overarching answer to it, is that, and it's actually similar to what Jazz was saying in her devotional at the beginning, was that it's about spending that quality time with him regularly. And the longer you do that over days, weeks, months, and years, you learn to discern this stuff a lot more quickly and a lot easier. But there are a few practical steps that I take that sort of help to break it down a little bit. So I'll just go through these quickly, and if we want to flesh any of them out, we can. The first, and I reckon the most important for us, is the idea of surrender and lordship, and that when we're faced with a decision and there's a few options that we can take, we have to surrender all the outcomes before him. And we don't, and it's very, and the reason I say this, and it's the first one we go through, is because it's so easy for our own motives and our own desires to creep in. There will be times when we're faced with decisions where there may not be any more material gain for us, depending on which one we pick. But there are other times where, say, you might get offered a promotion at work, and there's a strong material gain for you if you say yes. And so in that regard, you might need to go before God and say, look, Lord, I don't know whether I should take this promotion or not. It means I've got to do a lot of extra hours. It means I might have to travel for work or even move to another area or whatever, but I'm going to make a lot more money. So I need to surrender the making of more money before you and be content with what I have now and trust that you'll still guide me. So the first thing we do is surrender all the outcomes before him and say, I personally really don't care what the outcome is, as long as you're glorified, as long as it's the best outcome for your kingdom. That's what I care about. It's not about me getting famous. It's not about me making money. It's not about me being comfortable. And you've really got to do that before you try to discern his voice. That's been our experience. Secondly, taking the time to quiet yourself down. And that's pretty hard for a lot of people. It's probably harder for millennials and the next generations that follow, just because we're surrounded by stuff all the time. But if you don't take the time, even 5 minutes, but I'd suggest trying to take half an hour, to not be distracted, have your phone off, music off, whatever, and quiet yourself down, just you and the Lord. If we can't do that, all the other distractions and all the other input from everything else around us, it just gets in the way. So it's taking the time to either journal out your thoughts or empty your mind out, however you do that, but taking some time to really quiet yourself down. Next, I would say expect an answer. Often we really don't think we can hear from God, or we think he doesn't want to speak to us, and there's a whole bunch of different baggage that might come along with that if people have been let down before or feel like they can't hear from him or whatever. But the truth is that I think that your belief in God will have an influence on whether you hear from him or not. So part of my belief in God is that he wants to speak to us, and there's a whole bunch of scripture passages that speak to that. I don't think we have time to go through all of them, but one of them would be John 10. Jesus says, I'm the shepherd, you're the sheep. My sheep can hear my voice. They know my voice. They can tell when it's me talking to them. So I would say expect an answer. 4, depending on the gravity of the decision, check with other Christians. So go to other Christians that you trust, that are maybe older than you, wise people that can give good counsel, that won't just tell you what you want them. They won't just tell you what you want to hear, and ask them to pray. And just trusting that God will lead your thoughts through this process. So surrender, quieting yourself down, expecting an answer, checking with other Christians, and trusting that God will lead your thoughts as you go through the process.
Nick, there's some awesome stuff there. Thank you so much for sharing some of those ideas. I in particular really appreciate what you said about surrender. And in particular, when we have decisions when there's an outcome that we really want God to lead us towards, it's really attractive and it's what we hope for. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It may well be what God leads us to. But to actually take a step back, open our hands and say, all right, God, even, authentically say, this is the one I really want. But God, what do you want? And I'm okay with whatever your answer is. I know that is really important for me, and I've done that well and not well out of the times in my life. And I reckon there'd be a lot of us making decisions at the moment that will really help us in that. Question that I've got, and maybe a lot of us will have as we're growing, as you say, and learning and developing in this area, how do you know it's God speaking? So how do you know, Nick, that God is speaking to you? What could I expect if to discern and know that it's God speaking and not me making it up or something else?
Yeah. Tricky one. And I can only speak from my experience. I know it's not like this for everybody, and which is why I really want the focus to be on each individual's relationship with Jesus, because as that grows, you'll discern it for yourself easier over time. But for me personally, a couple of ways it's happened. One is that one idea will just be really prominent in my mind. So again, we might have 3 or 4 decisions in front of us, and I surrender them all before him. I'm praying about them, and one of them is just hammering on my mind over and over again. And I think, well, I'm praying about this, I'm surrendering it, and I'm asking God to speak to me. And this one idea just keeps on coming back into my mind. It seems logical that would be God. You know, I've asked him to speak to me. I've asked him to give his input, and this one idea keeps coming up. Other times it will just be which decision gives me the most peace. And again, that comes after surrender. So it's not what gives me the most peace in terms of what makes me feel best about myself, but it's after surrendering everything before him and saying, Lord, my motive is for your kingdom to grow, for you to be glorified. Now, which decision? And if one of those decisions gives me more peace than another one, that's another way that I would discern it. And then with Venita as well, it will just be confirming that with her, that she might have had one of those experiences when I didn't, or I might have prayed and it's been blank, but she's had one idea that's been really prominent. And sometimes when we've actually had quite open, where there hasn't been a clear 1, 2, or 3 options, but there's just a whole variety of options. There might be 100 different things we could pick from, which is how we ended up living where we are at the moment. We were praying a few months back about where God wanted us to live. Now that we were back in Melbourne, we had sort of a blank slate ahead of us. There was nothing tying us to a certain area. And so we said, all right, Lord, we want to put this into action now. I'd suggested to Venita one area that I thought would be cool to live in because there'd be a lot of ministry opportunity. She'd mentioned one area that she'd like to live in because she thought it'd be good for our family. And so we said, okay, well, let's just sit down and pray about this. We sit down and prayed, and we just waited quietly for a minute, and we both looked at each other and said, did a suburb pop into your mind? And we both had Croydon pop into our minds. And Croydon wasn't a suburb that either of us had mentioned before about living in. So I'd said one area, she'd said another area. We took 2 minutes, prayed about it, sat there quietly, both looked up, and I said, well, I don't know, the suburb Croydon was just running through our mind the whole time. And she said, oh, same for me. And so we took that as a sign that if we're asking God to speak to us, we're taking the time to quiet ourselves down, and then a suburb pops into our mind, we'll start leaning towards that as, okay, maybe this is God speaking to us.
Yeah, right. Well, that's really good. It's helpful, praying with someone else and in community. And what I like to say to that is Croydon is the holy suburb, and so we should all be moving back to Croydon as the place to live. So clearly you got that right, and God's leading is true in that. Hey, Jazz, I want to throw to you for a question.
Yeah, so Nick, has there ever been a time where you feel like you keep asking God for something and you want to hear him, and there is a point where you can't actually hear him, or there's a point where he takes a really long time in order for him to kind of get back to you and answer you on that?
Yeah, definitely. There's been times. There would have been a few big times. So at the end of last year, at the end of 2019, Venita and I were praying about how long we should stay with OM for, how long we should keep living in Africa for. And that process, again, probably took us a month. And that time, when we first talked and prayed together, we didn't just come up with the answer straight away. Like, we didn't feel that God gave us the answer in that moment. We were both feeling like we needed to reassess how long we were going to stay in South Africa for and work with OM for. And we had thrown around a whole bunch of different timelines of when we'd move and when we'd leave and whatever. And we had no really clear direction. And that probably took a month of us having conversations with each other, praying with each other, probably, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 times a week over the course of a month until we both finally settled on what God was saying to us. But for that whole month, depending on what day it was and how I was feeling that day, sometimes I thought we were staying in South Africa for a couple of years more. Sometimes I thought we were going to pack our bags and leave in a week. And there was a whole range of different thoughts, and I couldn't discern what he was saying immediately. And it took about a month of processing to get to that answer. So that's the first That's the first example that pops into my head, but I'm sure there's been other times when it feels like he's not speaking to you directly in the moment.
And Nick, have you got it wrong sometimes? Have you thought God said this, but it turned out, I got it wrong. He wouldn't have led me down that path as you reflect on it?
There are a couple of times that I've probably heard wrong where it was more that I didn't take the time to actually listen properly, I think. So rather than thinking he's told me something and then I've gone and done it and found out that it's wrong, it was more that I jumped into something without taking the time to wait and listen. I sort of made an assumption on what I thought he would want me to do or what I thought he would do, which then ended up backfiring. Or there'd be times when he's told me something that I didn't like, and I would sort of fight against that or try to get my own way for a period of time, and then what my first impression was ends up coming through. So last year we had one of our teams that was travelling. Vanita and I weren't with them. We had two people working for us that were running that team, and they got stuck at a border crossing in southern Africa between Mozambique and Malawi, and it was a bit of a drama. And they got held up at this border. The bus was going to leave them, our whole team, in between Mozambique and Malawi. And so Vanita and I were WhatsApping the team leaders. We went and prayed about it. And our team leaders had told us there was another bus coming in 2 days from the same company, and they were going to pick them up and bring them back down to South Africa. And as soon as they said that, I felt, again, similar actually to when we first felt we should move to South Africa. I felt that same feeling in my spirit going, they're going to be there for 2 days. They're going to be okay. And that bus is going to come and pick them up. And I remember thinking very clearly, that is definitely not going to happen. I'm not going to let these guys sit there for the next 2 days in between two countries with no way of getting out. And I got really stressed. I got really worried. I got Vanita and our other staff member that was with us, and we prayed for a long time. And I spent the whole weekend basically stressing out, trying to call embassies to see if they would help us get people out of this situation. And nothing helped. Nothing happened, except my stress levels going through the roof for 2 days. And then 2 days later, that bus came through. They had seats reserved for our team, picked them up, brought them down to South Africa. Everyone was fine, no hassles. And it had been an incredible bonding experience for our team. It had been a huge faith journey for our team. And I don't want to say it was a highlight for them, but it was an integral part of their experience and what God was doing in them through their time in Africa. And reflecting on it afterwards, I almost felt God discipline me a little bit, saying, I told you what was going to happen, and I was letting you in so that you wouldn't be stressed, so that you could work with them through this. Instead, you basically ignored what I said, felt like you heard wrong, and tried to take matters into your own hands, and didn't actually change anything, didn't make it go any quicker. It was just your stress levels that went through the roof for 2 days. So there'd be a few times where I've either not liked the answer he's given me, or where I haven't taken the time to listen before jumping into something, and then on reflection afterwards, seeing my mistake.
Yep. Just want to bring us to a landing here, Nick. You've given us so much really helpful stuff, so thank you so much for that. I know that a few of us would be listening to this and saying, this is so good and I want this to be true for me, but up until this moment in my life, I don't feel like I've heard from God much or often. I don't have confidence that I can hear from God. What would you say to some of us that are feeling that at the moment?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is that I think every Christian has always gone through a period like that. There's no one that has just believed in Jesus and then had the most incredible relationship with him from day one and not had to grow in some way. And there's plenty of examples in the New Testament of the disciples getting things wrong, even though they were living with Jesus and saw him doing everything, they still got things wrong at times. So the first thing I'd say is that everyone's gone through that. And if anyone is going through that right now, you're not the only one. Every Christian that's ever gone before you has gone through that same period, that same struggle of feeling that God just doesn't speak to me, either in this situation or at all. And what I would say next is that it comes back to your fundamental belief about God. And do you believe he loves you? Do you believe you're a child of God? Do you believe that he has the ability to speak to you? Because he does have the ability, he does love you, and you are his child. And how we view him will determine whether we hear from him in some way. So if we feel as if we can't hear from God, in a sense, it's limiting him. We might think that we're saying that there's something wrong with us, but if we're saying we can't hear from him, we end up almost saying that he's not big enough, he's not powerful enough, he doesn't love us enough to actually speak to us. So your view or your belief of God's character will come into play here. And if you don't believe God can speak to you, I would say that it may be a faith test for you to get the focus off yourself and say, it's not about me hearing from God, it's about God speaking to me, and do I believe that he can, and do I believe that he will? So that'd be pretty important questions for you to wrestle with if you're going through this at the moment. And then lastly, I'd say, to take the pressure off, it's just an area of your faith that you need to grow in. And every Christian has areas of faith they need to grow in. And some people might be able to discern God's voice quite easily from the first time they start following Jesus, but they'll have other areas that they're struggling with. The fruit of the Spirit, with patience or with love and with joy, things like that. They might be able to discern what God's saying, but they may have other areas that they're growing in. And if you're struggling to hear from God, I would say that's an area for you to grow in over the next few weeks and months and years, but it has no bearing on whether you're a good Christian or not. It doesn't mean that you are not as good as some other Christians going out there, but to look at it as, okay, this is an area of my faith that I think God wants me to focus on and God wants me to actively pursue and grow in over this next season. And I think if you recognize that he is saying that, if you at least recognize that you need to learn and grow in this area, then you can take practical steps. There's plenty of sermons out there. There's plenty of books out there on hearing God's voice and taking some practical steps to grow better in this area. But it probably won't happen overnight, like most things in life. And it's probably not as much about you yourself as a Christian, but it's just an area for you to grow in, not because there's anything fundamentally wrong with you. We've had people that have come and done our program in South Africa that just genuinely felt God doesn't speak to me. And we have seen him just over time as they've practiced, tried to listen and actively sought him out, that he has responded and he has come close to them and he has spoken to them and got some amazing testimonies coming out of that. So if that's you, then maybe find someone you can chat to about it. Maybe try to actively pursue this area of your faith over the next season and just look at it as an area that you grow in, not something where you're either passing or failing, but just an area where God wants you to grow over the next season.
Yeah, that's so good, Nick. I love that. This isn't failure. If you feel like you're not doing well, this is an opportunity. And if we see it that way, we can grow and strengthen with God. Well, Nick, I just want to thank you so much for your contribution and some of what you've shared with us today and how God's been leading you and Vanita over the last few years. And I just want to encourage any of you watching Nick's kind of practical things to work on. Consider surrendering everything to God in a decision. Lean on the community, lean on your small group, lean on others and see what they say. Quieten yourself and expect that God will answer you back. These things don't determine what God will say, but they give us every chance to receive from him. Nick, thank you so much for what you've shared with us today. Hey, Jazz, I just want to thank you for your contribution and your devotion and your questions along the way, and a shout out to Dave Sobey, who's doing the switching for us and making all of this work. And to you, everyone at home, thank you for being a part of the conversation. Every day you make 35,000 decisions. Make them count. Some of them will be small and some of them will really matter, but the next decision, the next thing that you do, it matters. And God has a view and God is leading and he is with you. And so believe that he is present. Call on him to guide you and expect and wait that he will. We are not called to just believe in Jesus. We're called to follow him. We're called to walk in his footsteps, for it to be practical and a lived experience of life with him. And so whatever it is that God has stirred in you through this conversation today, I want to encourage you to apply it, to live it out, and to walk with God in that. So it's been great joining with you today. This is Young Adults Live, and we'll be back again in 2 weeks' time. Go well this week. May God lead you in all of your decisions, and we'll see you soon.